Thanksgiving, a time for family, food, and fun. Or is it? What if, behind the warmth of the holiday, something darker is lurking? Imagine sitting down for dinner, only to realize that not everything is as it seems. In today's video, we're going to share 5 scary Thanksgiving stories that will make you look at the holiday in a whole new way. From strange happenings during family dinners to creepy encounters you won't believe, these are the stories no one talks about. So grab your plate and get ready for a different kind of feast, one full of fear. Story 1. The Harvest Ritual. When you grow up in a small town, you get used to the idea that everything has its place. The town hall, the old church, the diner that's been there for decades. Nothing changes. Not much ever happens either, until something does. You know the kind of thing I mean, right? When the world around you shifts, and you feel it deep down in your bones, but you can't put your finger on it. That was the feeling I got the night everything changed. I guess I should start by telling you about the town, since most of you probably don't know it. It's a quiet place, almost like something out of a postcard. Pumpkin patches, families gathering for the annual Thanksgiving parade, and kids running around with faces painted like pumpkins. It's the kind of town where people know everyone's name. The kind of place where you can still leave your front door unlocked without worrying about someone breaking in. Sounds nice, doesn't it? A little too perfect, maybe. The group I hung out with back then, well, we were your typical bunch of teenagers. Best friends who'd been together forever, and we knew everything about each other. At least, that's what we thought. We'd hang out at Jamie's house, play video games, or sometimes just sit around at the diner, talking about nothing. But when we heard about the old legend, that's when things started to get strange. It all started with a stupid dare like most of these things do. We were sitting around one night, talking about Thanksgiving plans. The parade was coming up, the turkey dinners were already being talked about, and everything seemed normal. But that night, Jamie's older brother, Will, who'd recently come back to town after moving away for a few years, mentioned this weird local folklore he'd heard about. It wasn't something you'd find in any history book or tourist guide. It was one of those whispered among the old folks kind of stories. Will wasn't exactly the most reliable person, always messing with us, so we didn't pay much attention at first. But then he got serious, really serious, and that caught our attention. He told us about an ancient ritual tied to Thanksgiving, something that had been practiced years ago to ensure the town's prosperity. He said that the ritual was long forgotten by most people, but it still had some kind of pull on the town, even if no one realized it. The harvest had always been plentiful in this town, and that's how the legend had started. According to Will, the town's elders would perform this ritual deep in the woods during Thanksgiving, but over the years, it faded away, and now nobody even talked about it. We laughed it off, of course. It was just another one of those spooky stories to tell around a campfire. But then, out of nowhere, Will pulled out an old, dusty book from his backpack. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades, covered in dirt and crumbling at the edges. He said he found it in the attic of his grandmother's house when he was staying there one summer. "This is the book that tells the real story," he said, flipping through the pages, showing us drawings of old symbols and strange words written in a language we didn't recognize. There was one page that stood out, and it had a picture of a group of people gathered in a circle around a bonfire, holding strange objects. The words under the picture were something about sacrifice to the harvest. Now, I know what you're thinking. This sounds like the setup to one of those typical scary stories you hear around Halloween, right? But trust me when I say it felt different. Maybe it was the way Will looked when he showed us that page, his face pale, almost like he'd seen something terrible. "Do you think we should try it?" Jamie asked, half joking, but there was a glint in her eye that made me think she wasn't as sure as she sounded. None of us were really sure, but we were bored, and the idea of doing something crazy for Thanksgiving sounded like fun. And let's face it, we were looking for something that could spice up our otherwise dull lives. So, we decided to go for it. It was supposed to be harmless, right? Just a dumb ritual. Nothing could go wrong. We agreed to meet the next night in the woods after the festival was over. It was going to be perfect. No one would even know we were there, and we could pull off the ritual like some kind of weird prank. At least that's what we thought. The night of the ritual, I can still remember how crisp the air was, how the stars seemed brighter than usual. We walked into the woods, the smell of the earth beneath us, and the sound of crunching leaves filling the silence. We had the book with us, a small fire pit, and a few candles. Everything we thought we'd need to perform the ritual. We found the clearing Will had described, the one where the ceremony supposedly took place. It was quiet, too quiet. Even the wind had stopped. There was no sound, nothing. It felt off, but we shrugged it off. We had come too far to turn back now. We started reading the words from the book, some of us laughing, some of us nervous, and others just pretending like it was all a joke. But as we said the words aloud, something started to change. At first, it was small, just a flicker of light in the trees, a rustling noise in the distance. But then it grew. The wind picked up, and the air turned colder. And then, the ground began to shake, just slightly at first, but enough to make us stop. "Did you feel that?" I asked, my voice shaking. Everyone looked around, eyes wide. It was like the woods were alive, like they were responding to us. We didn't know it then, but we had done something. We had said the wrong words, and now it was too late. We had opened a door we shouldn't have. At first, everything seemed fine. We joked about how silly we were, trying to convince ourselves that it was just the wind. But as we started heading back, that's when we noticed it. Something wasn't right. The crops in the fields near the woods were withering. The pumpkins we had seen earlier that day were turning black and rotting before our eyes. The air felt thick, almost suffocating. By the time we got back to town, it was like something had shifted. People were acting strange. They seemed off. No one said much, but there was a nervous energy in the air. And then we saw it, the first sign that we had done something truly terrible. A man, Mr. Harris, one of the town's oldest residents, was standing in the middle of the street, staring at the sky. His face was pale, his eyes wide, and as we walked past him, he whispered something under his breath that sent chills down my spine. "It's begun." That was the moment we realized what we had done. We had awoken something that should have stayed buried. We tried to undo the ritual, but no matter what we did, it was too late. The town had been marked, and there was no going back. In the days that followed, strange things kept happening. People went missing. The animals in the fields became aggressive, attacking anyone who came too close. The crops kept dying, and the town's people started to change. They were colder, more distant. Something was calling to them, something ancient, and it wasn't done with us yet. We tried to leave. We thought we could run, but one by one, the others started to vanish. Only I made it out. The others, they were taken. I don't know what happened to them, but every night, I hear whispers in my dreams. The town is not the same anymore, and neither am I. What did we awaken that night? What did we unknowingly bring back from the past? And why did I survive when the others didn't? If you ever visit a small town during Thanksgiving, take a good look around, because you never know what kind of history it might be hiding. Story 2. The Thanksgiving Haunting. Have you ever noticed how families have those secrets no one talks about? Like they're just sitting there in the middle of the room, but everyone steps around them like they don't exist? Well, that's my family. We've got one big secret, and her name is Samantha. Samantha is my aunt. She's 54 now, but she's lived her whole life in my grandma's house, barely stepping outside. To be honest, growing up, I didn't think much about it. It was just how things were. She was the quiet lady upstairs who sometimes made strange noises or said weird things. My grandma would hush us kids and say, "Leave her be, she's special," and that was the end of it. But as I got older, I started wondering why. Why did Samantha stay up there? Why didn't she come to our birthdays, or go to church, or do any of the things other people do? My grandma had all kinds of excuses. She's not like us, she'd say. She doesn't understand the world out there. And we believed her. We had no reason not to. Thanksgiving this year was supposed to be normal. Just the family, some food, and the same stories my grandpa always used to tell before he passed. But this year wasn't normal. Not even close. It started with the TV. The TV in the living room has always been Samantha's lifeline to the world. Specifically, holiday specials. She doesn't care about turkey, mashed potatoes, or pie. It's all about those cartoons, especially the Thanksgiving ones. Charlie Brown, Garfield, all of it. If they didn't air, there would be trouble. This year, trouble came. We were all sitting around the table, waiting for my grandma to say grace. My cousin Lucas had control of the remote, flipping channels while we were setting up. He said, "Hey, isn't that Thanksgiving special supposed to be on?" Grandma nodded but waved it off. "It'll come on," she said, like she always does. But it didn't. Lucas kept flipping, but the show wasn't there. It wasn't on any channel. I remember this heavy silence settling in the room. My dad looked at me, and I looked at my mom. Lucas said, "Guess they skipped it this year." That was when we heard it. The sound of Samantha's door creaking open upstairs. Now, to understand why this was unsettling, you have to know something about my aunt. She never opens her door. Never. When she does, it's because she's upset. And when Samantha's upset, things get bad. Did someone tell her? My mom whispered. No. Grandma snapped, suddenly all stiff. She just knows. I don't know how she knew, but Samantha's footsteps started coming down the stairs, slow and heavy. You could hear her bare feet dragging against the wood. Everyone froze. She didn't say anything when she appeared. She just stood there at the bottom of the stairs, staring at the TV. Her hair was messy, and her oversized sweater hung off her thin frame. Grandma got up and walked toward her. "Samantha, honey," she said in that soft voice she only uses with her. "Why don't you head back upstairs? Dinner will be ready soon." Samantha didn't move. She didn't blink. She just pointed at the TV and said, "Where is it?" Her voice was low, almost a growl. "It's not this year," Grandma said. "They must have canceled it." The second those words left her mouth, Samantha let out this loud, high-pitched scream. It was so sharp it made my little niece cry. Samantha didn't care. She stormed into the living room, grabbed the remote out of Lucas's hand, and started pressing buttons furiously. "No, no, 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 no," she yelled. Her voice was so loud and raw, like it hurt her throat just to get the words out. When the remote didn't bring up her show, she threw it across the room, and it shattered against the wall. It's hard to explain the chaos that followed. She started knocking over chairs, swiping books off the shelves, and yelling gibberish. My uncle tried to calm her down, but she pushed him so hard he fell backward. And then, she did something I'll never forget. She picked up the bowl of stuffing from the table, this big ceramic bowl, and hurled it at the TV. It missed the screen but smashed into the wall, pieces flying everywhere. She didn't even flinch. She just turned around and crawled. Yes, crawled back up the stairs on all fours, screaming the whole way. We all just stood there, stunned. The whole dinner was ruined. My niece was sobbing in my sister's lap. My dad was sweeping up stuffing and ceramic shards, and my mom was trying to convince Grandma to let Samantha see a doctor. "She needs help, Ma," my mom said. "You can't keep doing this. She doesn't need help." Grandma shot back. "She just needs things to stay the same. It's your fault for not telling me they weren't playing her show." But here's the thing. The night didn't end there. Around midnight, after everyone had gone to bed, I was still awake. I couldn't stop thinking about Samantha, about how she crawled up those stairs, about the look in her eyes. It wasn't just anger. It was fear. I decided to check on her. I crept upstairs, careful not to make a sound. Her door was slightly open, and I could hear her muttering to herself. At first I thought she was crying, but then I realized she was laughing. "Can't leave. Can't leave. They don't let me," she said, over and over. I peeked through the crack in the door, and my heart dropped. She was sitting on the floor in the dark, her knees pulled to her chest, rocking back and forth. Her eyes were wide, staring at something in the corner of the room. There was nothing there. At least I thought there was nothing there. I stood there, frozen, my hand gripping the edge of the doorframe. Samantha kept rocking back and forth, mumbling to herself, her gaze locked on the corner. She didn't even notice me. "Who's there?" I whispered, barely able to get the words out. She stopped rocking, dead still. For a second, I thought she hadn't heard me, but then her head snapped toward me so fast I stumbled back. "Why are you here?" she hissed, her voice low and scratchy, like it wasn't hers. I just wanted to check on you," I stammered, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst. Her eyes flicked back to the corner, and she whispered, "They don't like you being here. You should go." "Who doesn't like me being here?" I asked, but I already regretted it. "Them," she said, pointing toward the empty corner with one shaky finger. Her hand was trembling so hard it looked like it might break. There was nothing there, just the shadow cast by the dim hallway lights spilling into her room. "Samantha, there's no one there," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. She shook her head violently, her hair whipping around her face. "You can't see them. They don't want you to. But I see them. I hear them. They talk to me. They've always talked to me." The air in the room felt heavy, like it was pressing down on me. My legs felt weak, but I couldn't move. What do they say?" I asked. She stopped shaking her head and looked at me with those wide, terrified eyes. "They say I can't leave. They say none of us can. This house is theirs. It's always been theirs. I wanted to leave, I really did, but something about the way she said it kept me there. Like she wasn't just spouting nonsense. Like she believed it." "Samantha," I said, stepping into the room cautiously, "you're safe here. No one is going to hurt you." She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was bitter and sharp, like broken glass. "Safe? They don't hurt me because I listen. But you don't belong here. They're angry. They'll make you leave." I felt a cold draft against my neck, even though her window was shut. The hairs on my arm stood up. "I'm just here to help you," I said, more to convince myself than her. Samantha tilted her head, her gaze shifting back to the corner. "You should go," she repeated, her voice almost a whisper. I turned to look at the corner again, and for a split second I thought I saw something move. Just a flicker of darkness that shouldn't have been there. My breath caught in my throat, and I took a step back. "I think you're right," I said quickly, backing toward the door. "I should go." As I turned to leave, she said something that made my blood run cold. "They like the attic the best. That's where they come from. That's where they wait." I didn't sleep that night. Every little creak of the house made me jump. I kept thinking about the attic. We never went up there. It was just a dusty old storage space filled with boxes and forgotten junk. Or at least, that's what I thought. The next morning, I told my mom and dad what Samantha had said. They brushed it off. "She's just upset," my dad said. "You know how she gets when her routine is disrupted. She needs help," I insisted. "Serious help. She's talking about people in the house. About the attic. It's not normal. She's never been normal," Grandma snapped. "But she's mine to take care of, and I'll handle it." Her stubbornness was infuriating, but I couldn't let it go. That evening, after dinner, I decided to check the attic myself. I told myself it was just to prove there was nothing there, that Samantha's ramblings were just that, ramblings. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. The attic door was in the hallway, a pull-down ladder kind of deal. I'd never seen anyone go up there, not even Grandma. I grabbed a flashlight and pulled the ladder down. It creaked loudly, and for a moment, I thought Grandma would come out of her room and stop me. But no one did. I climbed up slowly, the flashlight shaking in my hand. The air was thick and musty, the smell of old wood and mildew. The space was cramped, filled with shadows cast by boxes and old furniture. But it wasn't empty. In the far corner, something caught my eye. A pile of old blankets, arranged in a way that looked intentional, like someone had been sleeping there. Next to it was a stack of papers. I knelt down and shone the light on them. They were letters, dozens of them, written in shaky, uneven handwriting. Most of them didn't make sense, just ramblings about voices and shadows and keeping them happy. But one letter, dated nearly 30 years ago, stood out. It said, "They're angry again." I didn't listen. I tried to leave, but they won't let me. They say the house is theirs, and we're just visitors. They'll punish us if we try to leave. They always do. The handwriting looked like Samantha's, but it couldn't have been. She didn't write letters. She barely wrote anything at all. Suddenly, the flashlight flickered, and I heard a loud thud from behind me. The thud behind me sent a jolt of panic through my body. I froze, the flashlight wobbling in my trembling hands. The beam of light swung erratically across the attic, bouncing off dusty boxes and forgotten furniture. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly turned toward the sound. There was nothing there, just an old wooden trunk and the dark, gaping emptiness of the attic. "Hello." My voice was barely more than a whisper, and it cracked as I spoke. No response, but I could feel something, a presence. It wasn't just fear. It felt like someone or something was watching me. I wanted to leave. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to go back down the ladder and pretend I'd never come up here. But I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to uncover. I turned the flashlight back to the pile of blankets and letters. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Scratch marks. They were faint, but they covered the wooden floor around the blankets, jagged and uneven like someone had clawed at the boards in desperation. I crouched down, tracing the marks with my fingers. They led to the far side of the attic, disappearing under an old rug that had been left to rot. My pulse quickened as I lifted the edge of the rug, revealing a small, square trapdoor. It looked ancient, the wood warped and splintered with age. Rusted hinges barely held it in place, and the edges were stained dark, too dark to be just dirt. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. I reached for the trapdoor, but the moment my fingers touched the handle, the flashlight went out. The attic plunged into complete darkness. I scrambled to turn the flashlight back on, shaking it and smacking it against my palm. Nothing. "Damn it," I hissed, fumbling in the pitch black. That's when I heard it. A whisper, soft and distant, like it was coming from far below the trapdoor. It was faint at first, just a low, unintelligible murmur. But it grew louder, more distinct, until I could make out words. "Get out." My breath hitched. "Get out. Get out. Get out." The whisper turned into a chant, echoing in the dark attic. It wasn't just one voice, it was multiple, overlapping, speaking in a tone that made my skin crawl. I backed away from the trapdoor, my hands shaking so badly I dropped the flashlight. It hit the floor with a loud clatter, and the chanting stopped. Silence. The kind of silence that isn't empty, but full, heavy, oppressive. Then, a loud bang. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. I bolted for the ladder, practically tripping over myself as I climbed down. My heart was racing, and I didn't stop until I was back in my room with the door locked. I sat on the bed, trying to catch my breath, my mind racing. What had I just seen? What was in that attic? The next morning, I tried to tell my family what happened. My dad brushed it off as an overactive imagination. My mom told me I was just stressed from all the drama with Samantha. But Samantha, she knew. When I looked at her during breakfast, she didn't meet my eyes. She just stared at her plate, mumbling under her breath. "They're angry," she whispered, so softly I almost didn't hear it. "You shouldn't have gone up there. Now they'll come for you." That night, the house felt different, colder. The creaks and groans of the old wood seemed louder, more deliberate. I tried to sleep, but every time I closed my eyes, I heard faint whispers. By midnight, the whispers turned into footsteps. They started at the end of the hallway, slow and deliberate. Each step made the floorboards creak, coming closer and closer to my room. I pulled the covers over my head, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The footsteps stopped outside my door. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might stop. I waited, holding my breath, praying it was just my imagination. But then the door handle turned. The door creaked open, and cold air rushed into the room. I peeked out from under the covers, my hands trembling. The room was empty, but the door was wide open, and the hallway beyond it was pitch black. I reached for my phone, fumbling to turn on the flashlight. As the beam of light illuminated the hallway, I saw something that made my blood run cold. At the end of the hall, just outside the attic door, stood a figure. It was tall and shadowy, its features impossible to make out, but its presence was undeniable. It didn't move. It just stood there, watching. The next morning, I begged my parents to leave the house. "There's something wrong here," I told them. "We need to get out." But they didn't believe me. They never did. That evening, I packed a bag. I couldn't stay, not after what I'd seen. Before I left, I went to check on Samantha one last time. Her room was empty. Panicked, I searched the house, calling her name. No one had seen her. That's when I noticed the attic ladder was down. I climbed up, my heart pounding in my chest. The attic was empty, except for the pile of blankets and the trapdoor. The trapdoor was open. Inside, I found Samantha's diary. The last entry read, "They've taken me. Don't try to find me. It's too late. They've won. The house is empty now. We sold it months ago. But sometimes late at night, I still hear the whispers. And I know they're not done with me yet." Are you currently enjoying the story? Go ahead and pause for a sec. Hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It really helps me get feedback. Thanks, and now let's continue the story. Story 3. The Feast That Never Ended. It was a few days before Thanksgiving, and I was already feeling the stress creeping in. Everyone knows how chaotic those days before the big family dinner can get, but this year, it felt even worse. You see, I was trying to make everything perfect like always, but this time there was a twist. My 82-year-old mother-in-law, Susan, suddenly announced that she had become vegan. Yeah, you heard that right. Vegan. I couldn't wrap my head around it at first. Susan had always been one for the traditional meals. You know, turkey, mashed potatoes, stuffing, all the things that make Thanksgiving. But now, she said she didn't want any of it. The whole spread had to change. No more turkey, no more gravy, no more pies with cream. She was serious about this vegan thing. And honestly, I wasn't sure if it was just a phase or what. But I had to adapt because, well, family is family. I spent hours online looking for vegan recipes. Things like tofu turkey and vegan stuffing that I'd never even heard of before. It was a nightmare. And you know what's the worst part? Susan was all on board. She seemed excited even, talking about how she'd never felt better since cutting out meat. She was practically glowing about it. But here's where things get weird. The day before Thanksgiving, my daughter, Emily, came to me and casually dropped a bombshell. "Mom," she says, "Grandma Susan ate chicken wings with us last week. She said it was her favorite." I froze. My blood ran cold. Wait, what? Grandma Susan? Chicken wings? Vegan Susan, the woman who'd been preaching plant-based diets for the last year, was eating chicken? I couldn't believe it. I thought Emily had gotten something wrong. I asked her again, but she was sure of it. I was feeling so confused and upset, but I let it go for the moment. Maybe it was just a slip-up. Maybe Susan had some kind of reason for doing it. but my gut told me something wasn't right. So, I tried calling Susan, but she didn't pick up. That only made my unease grow. It was almost like she didn't want to talk about it. The whole thing started to sit wrong with me. Was she really vegan? Had she just been saying that to mess with us? Or was there something else going on? Thanksgiving morning came, and I was trying my best to pull everything together. I had made everything vegan, from the main dish to the sides, even down to the dessert. My kitchen was packed with strange ingredients I'd never used before, and the house smelled different, like something I couldn't quite identify. It was a bit unsettling, honestly, but I thought, it'll be fine. It's just a holiday dinner, no big deal. Then Susan showed up. She walked into my house like nothing had changed, like there was nothing odd about the last-minute menu shift. But when I saw her face, something was off. Her smile was a little too wide, and her eyes were just a bit too bright. There was something in her gaze that made me feel uneasy. The dinner went as planned, mostly, but the whole time, I kept thinking about that chicken wings comment Emily had made. I had to know what was going on. So, in the middle of the meal, I blurted it out, "Susan, I just don't get it. You said you were vegan, but last week you ate chicken wings with Emily. Why the change?" I was hoping for some reasonable explanation. I don't know, maybe she just didn't like tofu turkey or something. But the look she gave me, it wasn't what I was expecting. She smiled, just this tiny little half smile, and said, "I needed a change, dear. But I'm back to my old ways now. Don't worry about it." The way she said it sent a chill down my spine. I don't know why, but I knew she wasn't just talking about food. The rest of the evening was weird. Susan barely spoke to anyone, not even to my husband, her own son. She just sat there, staring at her plate, picking at her food, not really eating. And then, when the meal was over, she disappeared into the kitchen. I thought she was just cleaning up, or maybe helping with the leftovers. But when I went to check on her, I found her standing in front of the fridge, staring at the leftover turkey. It was strange. She wasn't touching it, and wasn't even opening the door. She just stood there, like she was waiting for something. Her eyes were wide, like she hadn't blinked in ages. And for a split second, I thought I saw something flicker in her eyes, something dark. I quickly walked back to the dining room and tried to push the thought out of my mind. But the rest of the night just felt off. The clock ticked on, and finally, it was time for everyone to leave. But just as Susan reached the door, she stopped and turned to me. She looked at me for a long moment before speaking in a soft, almost hollow voice. "You did well with the meal. I think we're going to have a lot more dinners like this and more guests, dear." She smiled again, but this time there was something wrong with that smile. It wasn't kind or sweet. It was unsettling, and I swear, it sent shivers up my spine. She left, and I thought the worst of the evening was over. But when I went to the kitchen to clean up, I saw something that froze me in place. The fridge door was wide open, and inside, the turkey, the stuffing, the mashed potatoes, they were all gone. The containers were still there, but there was no food left inside them. I stood there, frozen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The smell of chicken, real chicken, was in the air. The kind of smell you get when someone has been cooking something greasy and rich. It didn't make sense. I had made everything plant-based, everything for Susan's new diet. So how was there chicken here? I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. No one would believe me. But that night, I realized something. Susan wasn't the woman she used to be. Whatever had changed her, it wasn't just about food. And whatever it wasn't over. It was just beginning. I stood there in front of the open fridge, staring at the empty containers. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. I checked the kitchen again, almost expecting someone to jump out from behind the counter and laugh at my confusion. But no one was there. It was just me, the cold refrigerator, and the strange, lingering smell of chicken. My heart was racing. It didn't make sense. Susan hadn't touched the turkey at all during dinner. So how? How could it be gone? Has someone else eaten it? But then who? And Why would they leave the containers so neatly placed back in the fridge? I was so rattled that I couldn't even think straight. My mind kept going back to Susan's words as she left. The way she smiled at me just before walking out the door. "More guests, dear," she'd said. Her voice had sounded so final, and those eyes of hers gleaming, almost as if they knew something I didn't. I tried to shake the feeling off, but it was impossible. The house felt colder now, even though the heat was on. I looked out the window, and the dark sky pressed down on me, making the house feel like a small, isolated island in the middle of something vast and ominous. The next morning, I was determined to brush everything off as just some weird, late-night stress from the holiday. But as I started cleaning up, there was something I couldn't ignore. I had barely touched the leftovers. We had so much food left, and I was planning on packing it away when something caught my eye in the corner of the kitchen. The fridge. It was slightly open. I didn't remember leaving it open. I was sure I had shut it the night before, after finding it empty. But now it was ajar. A cold breeze seemed to seep from the gap, and the oddest thing happened. I could smell it again. That same faint, but unmistakable, odor of cooked chicken. It was impossible. As I approached the fridge to close it, something strange happened. A shadow crossed the kitchen floor. I froze. I couldn't explain it, but the shadow was moving. It seemed to pass in front of me, and then just disappear. My breath hitched in my chest, and my hands began to tremble. No, this was all in my head. I was just tired from the chaos of the holiday, but the feeling wouldn't go away. And the more I stood there, the more that uneasy sense of something wrong crept over me. I slammed the fridge shut and turned around, trying to steady my nerves. Then I heard it, a soft, faint scratching sound coming from the kitchen. I stiffened, my heart hammering in my chest. I looked around but saw nothing. No one was there, just me, the kitchen, and the same eerie silence. Then I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The counter, the turkey platter, empty last night, was now full. The meat, the stuffing, the gravy, everything was there like nothing had been touched. I stood, frozen, staring at the counter. I couldn't bring myself to approach it. It was impossible. How could this be happening? How was the turkey back on the counter? I stumbled backwards, bumping into the kitchen chair, my mind struggling to make sense of everything. But deep down, a part of me knew Susan had something to do with this. She'd been acting weird last night, her eyes too bright, her smile too cold. And when she left, her words, her cryptic smile, they had all hinted at something dark, something that wasn't over. My phone buzzed, and I jumped, almost dropping it in the process. It was Emily. "Mom, I've been thinking about Grandma," she texted. "She came over last night and told me some strange stuff. I don't know if I'm just overthinking it, but she was talking about how she didn't need to eat real food anymore. She said she could live off of something else." She sounded weird. I read the message again, feeling my stomach twist. Live off of something else? What did that even mean? I texted Emily back, telling her to stay at home and not come over, but I wasn't sure if it was the right move. I felt like whatever had happened to Susan, whatever had taken over her, wasn't just something she could talk about. It was real, and it was growing. That evening, I had to go back to the fridge. I knew it was a bad idea, but I had to see for myself. Something was pulling me there. It was as though I couldn't stop myself from going. The fridge door creaked as I opened it, and there, sitting inside, was a new platter. A platter full of more food. The turkey, the stuffing, the mashed potatoes. It was all there again, even though I just cleaned everything up hours ago. And in that moment, I knew Susan wasn't just bringing leftovers home. She was feeding something that wasn't human. I felt my body go cold as realization hit me. Susan had become something else, something that couldn't live without the food we were preparing. She wasn't eating to satisfy a craving. She was feeding something dark, something hungry, I backed away from the fridge slowly, every inch of me screaming to run. But then, the lights flickered. I spun around, and there she was, Susan, standing in the doorway. Her eyes were wide open, but they weren't hers anymore. The warmth was gone, replaced by something hollow, and her smile, this time, was a sickeningly slow curl of satisfaction. "I told you," she whispered, voice hoarse. "I needed a change, dear. And now I'm not going anywhere." I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. It was as if the air had thickened, making it hard to breathe. Susan stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, her gaze never leaving mine. She didn't look like herself anymore. She looked like something else. Something old. Something hungry. And that's when I realized I wasn't just the host of Thanksgiving dinner. I was the prey. I turned, bolted for the door, but before I could reach it, the lights went out completely. The house was silent, except for the sound of footsteps behind me. Slow, heavy, and then the whisper again. "You'll understand soon enough, dear. Thanksgiving never ends. It's just the beginning." Story 4. The Feast of Shadows. I remember my first Thanksgiving back at the family estate like it was yesterday. It wasn't the food, the laughter, or even the awkward conversations that stuck with me. No, it was the way the house felt. Like it was watching us, waiting. The house had always been big, old, and grand. My grandparents built it back in the early 1900s, and it was like stepping into another time when you walked in. The floors creaked under your feet, the walls lined with old family portraits, and the smell of wood and dust seemed to hang in the air, no matter how much we tried to clean it. It's where my siblings and I used to spend the holidays as kids. But this year, it was different. Things weren't quite right. Maybe it was because we hadn't all gathered together in years, not since my dad passed. It was just too much for everyone, the grief that lingered, and the old tensions between my uncles, aunts, and cousins. But this year, we decided to give it a try. They said it would be good for the family. Maybe it was, but it didn't feel like it. Not really. When I arrived, the house was eerily quiet. The kind of quiet that makes you feel like you're not really alone, you know? My Aunt Nancy was the first to greet me at the door. She gave me a tight hug, her smile a little too forced. It's always been like that with her. Something about her makes my skin crawl, even if she's the nicest person on the outside. We didn't waste any time. My cousins, Jason and Ellie, had already started putting the dinner together. I could hear them bustling around in the kitchen, the clinking of silverware, and the smell of roasting turkey wafting through the house. My Uncle Michael was on the couch, flipping through the channels on the TV, not really watching anything. And my mom was the one I was worried about. She was quiet, even for her, and seemed to be lost in thought, staring out the window at the thick woods that surrounded the estate. The first thing I noticed was the flickering of the lights. It wasn't anything major, just a quick blink here and there like a bulb was about to burn out. But after a while, it started happening more and more, especially in the hallway near the dining room. At first, I thought it was just old wiring, but something about it felt off, like there was more to it than just that. We sat down for dinner around 6 p.m., the dining room lit by the flickering candlelight from the old chandelier above. The table was set in its usual grand fashion. Fine china, crystal glasses, and an impressive centerpiece of autumn leaves and pumpkins. But as I sat down and looked at the turkey in front of me, something about it felt wrong. It looked perfectly golden brown, crispy on the outside, tender on the inside. It was exactly how we've always made it, but still, there was something unsettling about it. Maybe it was just me. As we all started digging into the meal, the conversations felt forced. It was the usual, "How have you been?" and "How's work?" But no one seemed really interested. They were all talking just to fill the silence, like they didn't want to be there, but they had no choice. I could see the way my mom's hand trembled as she reached for the wine glass. My Aunt Nancy kept glancing at the turkey, like she was waiting for it to do something. That's when the first vision hit me. I was cutting into the turkey when my knife suddenly felt heavier than it should. And then I saw it, my dad's face. Just for a second, right there on the plate, his eyes wide, his mouth open like he was trying to say something, but no sound came out. I blinked, and it was gone. Just a turkey again. But my heart was racing. I looked up, expecting someone else to have noticed. But no one did. Everyone kept eating, chatting, and laughing like nothing had happened. So, I brushed it off. Maybe it was just my imagination. After all, the house had a way of messing with your mind. It always did. But then it happened again. This time, my Aunt Nancy's face morphed into something darker. Her features stretched out, her smile widening unnaturally as she looked at me across the table. I had to look away, my stomach turning. I pushed my chair back, trying to get some air, but as soon as I stood up, the lights flickered again, this time going out completely. The room was plunged into darkness. "Mom?" I called out, trying to find her, but I couldn't see a thing. My heart pounded in my chest, and my breath came in short gasps. I reached around blindly, trying to grab onto something familiar, but then I heard it, a whisper, soft at first, but getting louder. I couldn't make out the words, but it felt familiar. It felt like it was speaking to me. My name. I snapped on the flashlight on my phone, and the beam of light cut through the darkness, landing on my mom's face. But her eyes weren't right. They were wide, too wide, and there was something in them, something angry. She was staring at the turkey in front of her, her hands gripping the edge of the table so hard that her knuckles were white. I was about to ask if she was okay when I heard a scream. It came from the kitchen. Everyone froze. Then my Aunt Nancy's voice broke the silence, her tone low, almost like she was talking to herself. "It's happening again." "What do you mean again?" I asked, my voice trembling. She turned to me slowly, her face twisted in a way I've never seen before. "You're all going to see it, one by one." Before I could respond, the lights flickered back on, but everything felt wrong. The room was colder, and the shadows in the corners of the dining room seemed to move on their own. The turkey in the center of the table was no longer just a turkey. It was something else. I couldn't tear my eyes away from it. Something was inside it. Something alive. And then everything stopped. We all just sat there, staring at the turkey. The conversation stopped. The noise stopped. Even the clock on the wall seemed to stop ticking. I couldn't breathe. I needed to know what was happening, but I couldn't bring myself to speak. It was like whatever was in that turkey had a hold on me, on all of us. And then, as if on cue, my mom stood up suddenly and shouted, "We have to face it. We have to face everything." The turkey began to change. It split open, revealing a dark, gaping hole inside. The flesh of the turkey was no longer just meat. It was like something else, something darker. Everyone at the table gasped, and as we all stared in disbelief, each of us was hit with a vision. Our past mistakes, our darkest secrets, things we had tried to bury and forget. But now, there was no escaping them. Not anymore. I saw my mom and dad fighting, screaming at each other. I saw my Aunt Nancy's cruel words to me when I was a kid. Jason, my cousin, had done something he'd never told anyone, something he was so ashamed of. Ellie, she wasn't as innocent as she appeared. The turkey, it wasn't just dinner. It was a manifestation of everything we had done wrong. And one by one, the family members began to break down. They couldn't handle the weight of the truth, and they disappeared into the shadows, one by one, until only I was left standing. I had no choice. I had to make a decision. Stay and be consumed by the darkness, or run. But it was too late. The last thing I remember was the sound of my own heartbeat, pounding in my ears, and the turkey. The turkey had become something far worse than any of us had imagined. And now, I don't know if I'll ever leave this house. I could feel my pulse in my throat, every heartbeat vibrating through my chest like an alarm that wouldn't stop ringing. The room had gone dead silent again, the shadows in the corners stretching unnaturally long. It was as if time itself had stopped, and the world outside was miles away. But the worst part? The turkey. It was still there, sitting on the table like it was waiting for me. The smell of roasting meat had vanished, replaced by something sour, something rotten. I don't know why, but I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor, like something invisible was holding me there, forcing me to watch. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the turkey. The flesh had changed. The golden, crispy skin that had once glistened was now mottled with dark patches, as though the meat itself was trying to escape. A faint, dark smoke rose from it, curling into the air like tendrils of some unholy spirit. And that hole in the center, it wasn't just a hole anymore. It was a mouth, wide and gaping, as if the turkey itself was breathing, waiting for something. Then I heard it, a voice, low, rasping. "Look at what you've done." I spun around, trying to locate the source, but no one was there. My mom was standing in the corner, trembling, her eyes wide with fear, but I couldn't hear her breathing. No one was making a sound anymore, except for the voice coming from the turkey. It knows everything," the voice said again. "The secrets you've buried, the lies you've told, the sins you've committed. You think you can run from them?" My throat felt tight, and I struggled to swallow. I couldn't breathe. Every word the turkey spoke was like a slap to the face, a cold reminder of every mistake I'd made. The vision hit me again, stronger this time. I was 10 years old, sitting in the living room of this very house, staring out the window at the storm outside. My parents were arguing in the other room, loud, ugly arguments that I'd never understood at the time. But I remembered now. They weren't just fighting. They were tearing each other apart over something much darker than I could comprehend. Something that my dad had done. Something that I was too young to know about then. The voice continued, "You remember, don't you? You never told anyone. Not even your mom. You were too scared to admit it. Too scared to face what your father had done." I felt sick. I tried to look away, but the turkey's voice gripped me, pulling me deeper into that memory. My dad's face twisted with guilt and anger as he stormed out of the house, leaving us alone, with nothing but a trail of lies and broken promises. The darkness in the room deepened, and then, just as suddenly, everything went quiet. The voice stopped, and the shadows seemed to recede. For a brief moment, I thought it was over. Maybe it was just a bad dream. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But the turkey, no, the thing on the table, was still there, staring at me with its hollow, black eyes. The hole in its chest was growing wider, its edges ragged, like it was alive, breathing, waiting to swallow me whole. "I want to show you something," the turkey said, its voice like the scrape of nails on a chalkboard. I didn't have the strength to resist. The voice was inside my head now, louder than my own thoughts, making it impossible to think of anything else. I stumbled forward, my feet dragging behind me, as if the house itself was trying to keep me away. My hand hovered over the table, but I couldn't bring myself to touch it. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get out, but my body wouldn't obey. It was like I was under some kind of spell, and then it happened. The turkey's mouth opened wide, wider than it should have been possible. The edges of the hole stretched open like the jaws of some terrible beast. The room seemed to pulse with an energy that made my skin crawl, and I saw it, inside the turkey, inside the flesh. Faces. Faces of the family, twisted in pain and horror, trapped inside the meat, screaming silently at me with their eyes. My Aunt Nancy, her face contorted with guilt, her mouth locked in a silent scream. My cousin Jason, his eyes wide, tears streaming down his cheeks. And my mother, God, my mother, her face was pale, her lips trembling, her eyes staring at me with terror. They were all there, all of them, trapped. The turkey was a prison for their sins, their guilt, their darkest secrets. "No!" I screamed, backing away. But the thing on the table seemed to pull me in, its hunger insatiable. I could hear their voices now, whispering in my ears, each one louder than the last. "Help me!" My mom's voice. "It's your fault." My uncle's voice. "Don't run. You can't escape." Tears streamed down my face, but I couldn't look away. The faces inside the turkey, they weren't just my family's faces. They were mine too. I saw myself, a version of myself I didn't recognize. A version that had betrayed them all. A version that had hidden things I didn't want to remember. I could feel the weight of my past pressing in on me, suffocating me. The turkey had become a mirror, reflecting every mistake, every lie, every moment I had tried to forget. And now, it was demanding the truth, demanding that I face what I had done. "You can't hide anymore," the voice said, its tone cold and final. "This is the price. You've all paid it, and now, you will pay too." The room seemed to close in on me. The walls were no longer solid. They were melting, warping, distorting like something out of a nightmare. The faces inside the turkey were stretching, turning, becoming unrecognizable as they reached toward me, their mouths opening in silent screams. I felt my knees buckle. I didn't have the strength to fight it. The darkness was swallowing me whole, and I couldn't escape. The last thing I remember was my own voice, my own scream, ripping through the air as the shadows took me. When I woke up, I was alone. The house was silent, too silent. The lights were back on, and everything seemed normal. But it wasn't. The turkey was gone, and so were my family members. There was no sign of them, no trace left, just an empty dining room. I stumbled out of the dining room, my heart pounding in my chest. I ran through the house, looking for anyone at all, but there was no one. It was as if they had never been there. The house was empty, but the feeling wasn't gone. The weight of what had happened was still heavy on me, suffocating me. I don't know if they were ever real, or if any of it was real, but I know this. The darkness in that house, in that turkey, is still with me. It won't let me go. And now, every Thanksgiving, I can't help but wonder, what if it comes back? What if next time, I'm not the only one left? Story 5. The Thanksgiving Visitor. You never expect anything out of the ordinary on Thanksgiving, right? It's a holiday that's supposed to be all about family, food, and a little relaxation before the holiday chaos kicks in. But for us, it was the start of something we could never explain, something that changed everything. I'll never forget the night we decided to let him in. It started just like any other Thanksgiving. My wife, Julie, and I had planned for a quiet evening. It was just going to be the two of us at the cabin, tucked away in the woods. We didn't need much, just each other, some good food, and a peaceful night away from the hustle and bustle. We lived in a small cabin about 30 miles outside of town, a place where the only sounds you hear are the wind and the occasional owl. The kind of place that feels safe, like the world outside doesn't exist. We'd had a light snow earlier in the day, just enough to cover the ground and set the scene. The fire was crackling, the turkey was in the oven, and we were sipping on some wine, chatting about random things. Julie was humming to herself as she got the table ready, and I was just enjoying the peaceful moment. It was one of those nights where everything seemed right, like nothing could go wrong. But that all changed when we heard the knock. It wasn't the typical knock you'd expect, though. It was more of a pounding. Hard. Like someone was desperate to get inside. At first, I thought it was just the wind, but then it came again. Louder. Closer. I looked at Julie, confused. Who would be out there in this storm? I asked. We didn't have neighbors for miles. The road leading to our cabin was barely ever traveled, and the weather wasn't exactly inviting for anyone to be out in it. So, who could it be? I got up and walked to the door, hesitating for a second. Maybe it was some lost hiker or someone who had broken down. You don't really think much of it when you're in the moment, but deep down I felt something wasn't quite right. I opened the door, and that's when I saw him. He was standing there covered in snow, his face pale and drawn. His clothes were soaked through, his eyes wide, and his breath coming out in sharp, desperate gasps. It looked like he had been out in the storm for hours. His hair was matted against his forehead, and his hands were trembling. I could tell right away that he was freezing. He didn't say much at first, just stood there, staring at me. "Please, I need help," he muttered, his voice shaky. Julie appeared beside me, looking just as confused as I was. I didn't know what to do. The sensible thing would have been to turn him away. It wasn't safe to invite strangers in, especially on a night like this. But something about his eyes made me hesitate. Maybe it was the coldness in his voice. Or maybe it was just the desperation that seemed to leak from every part of him. Julie gave me a worried look, but she didn't protest. We were alone, and we couldn't just leave him out there to freeze. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. "Get out of the cold." The man didn't wait for a second invitation. He shuffled inside quickly, his heavy boots leaving snow prints on our wooden floors. Julie offered him a seat by the fire, and I went to grab a blanket and some hot coffee. But something felt off. I couldn't explain it at first. He seemed too calm for someone who had just walked through a blizzard. Maybe he was just exhausted. But his eyes, there was something about his eyes that didn't sit right. He kept glancing around the cabin like he was studying everything, every detail, and yet he never said much. As the evening went on, the tension in the room grew. We ate dinner, but the silence was thick. The only sounds were the occasional crackle from the fire and the soft hum of the wind outside. I asked him a few questions, where he was from, how he ended up stranded in the snow, but he gave vague answers. He mentioned something about being on a road trip, getting lost, and having car trouble, but nothing added up. His story felt rehearsed. I thought maybe I was just being paranoid. After all, it was a strange situation. I tried to shake off the feeling and focus on the meal, but Julie seemed just as uneasy as I felt. She kept glancing at him, then at me, her face pale. It was like she was waiting for something, waiting for him to do something. But what? Around dessert, things took a turn. We were sitting at the table when suddenly, the man, let's call him Richard, looked up at us, his eyes burning with intensity. "I've been looking for someone," he said, his voice lower now, more steady. He wasn't shaking anymore. In fact, he seemed almost too calm. I froze. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart starting to race. Richard's lips curled into a tight smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. "There's someone here I've been waiting to find. Someone from this town. Someone who wronged me. Years ago." Julie's fork clinked against her plate. She was clearly uncomfortable now. I could feel the air grow colder, despite the fire crackling in the hearth. "What do you mean, wronged you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Who are you looking for?" He leaned in closer, his gaze unwavering. "It's not who you think," he whispered. "It's not who you want it to be." At this point, the unease was unbearable. I could feel the tension in my bones, my stomach churning. What was he talking about? Who could he possibly mean? And why had he come here, on Thanksgiving of all days? I tried to play it off, offering him some more dessert, hoping to break the tension, but it didn't work. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation. His eyes never left me. The fire crackled behind us, casting flickering shadows on the walls, and I could feel a growing sense of dread creeping over me. Richard stayed with us long after dinner, almost like he had no intention of leaving. It was getting late, and we needed to get some sleep, but he kept talking about things that didn't make sense, about people from the town, about how he had been wronged. "You've heard of me," he he said suddenly, his voice sharp. "You know who I am? You just don't remember." I didn't know what he meant. I had no idea who he was. But then, just before we turned in for bed, he said something that made my blood run cold. "You will remember me," he said with a chilling smile. "You'll remember me when you see what happens next." Julie and I locked the doors that night, but the dread didn't go away. It only grew. As we lay in bed, I couldn't help but wonder, who was he really? Why had he come? What did he want? And more importantly, was he really who he said he was? In the end, what started as a simple act of kindness, inviting a lost soul into our home, turned into a nightmare we could never escape. The stranger, Richard, wasn't just lost in the storm. He had been looking for something dark and twisted, and he found it in us. And when we realized who he really was, it was already too late. Was he truly a man, or something far worse? What if he never left? What if, in the end, he had been the one waiting for us all along? If you actually enjoyed these stories, please subscribe and leave us a comment to the next horror story you want us to tell. Till then, see you in the next one.